It was one of those evenings that feel so ordinary you barely remember them later, or at least that's how it began. The house was quiet, wrapped in the familiar comfort of routine. Dinner dishes were drying on the rack, the television murmured softly in the background, and my wife sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, half listening to the news. We had been married for over 3 decades, long enough to move through the same space without speaking, long enough to feel secure in the silence. My phone had died earlier that afternoon. I needed to make a quick call, nothing important, just a routine check-in with an old friend. Without a second thought, I reached for my wife's phone. This was normal for us. We had never been secretive. Passwords were shared, lives were shared, and trust was something I believed we had earned through years of loyalty and sacrifice. "Do you mind?" I asked casually. She nodded, not even looking up. "Go ahead. That should have been the end of it." As I unlocked the phone, a notification slid down from the top of the screen. I wasn't trying to see it. I truly wasn't, but the human eye catches things before the mind has time to decide. A name flashed across the screen, one I recognized instantly. My son-in-law. At first, I smiled faintly. Maybe it was about my daughter. Maybe he needed advice. I had always treated him like family, welcomed him into my home, trusted him with the most precious thing in my life, my child. I told myself to ignore it. I tapped the call screen, but another message came in before I could dial. And then another. The phone vibrated gently in my hand, but inside me something tightened, like an invisible string being pulled too hard. Something felt wrong. I hesitated. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at the phone as if it might explain itself. I reminded myself that trust means not looking, that love means giving space, that marriage survives on respect. But curiosity isn't always born from suspicion. Sometimes it's born from instinct. The quiet voice that tells you danger is near before you understand why. I opened the message thread. At first, the words didn't make sense. They weren't explicit. They weren't openly romantic. They were worse. Asterisk, did you get home safe? Asterisk, asterisk, I've been thinking about our conversation all day. Asterisk, asterisk, you understand me in ways no one else does. Asterisk, my heart began to pound, slow and heavy, like it was trying to break through my ribs. I scrolled. Each message felt like a small cut, clean, precise, and deeply personal. They spoke of feelings, of shared moments, of emotional closeness that crossed boundaries I had believed were sacred. There were inside jokes, late-night confessions, words that belonged nowhere near a relationship between a mother-in-law and a son-in-law. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't innocent. This was something that had grown quietly, comfortably, right under my roof. My hands started to tremble. I leaned against the table, suddenly afraid my legs wouldn't hold me. I felt like a stranger in my own home, like I had stepped into a life that looked like mine but wasn't. I thought of my daughter, her laughter, her trust, the way she spoke about her husband with pride. I thought of my wife, the woman I had stood beside through sickness, struggle, and sacrifice. I remembered nights we stayed awake talking about our dreams, the future we built together piece by piece. And now all of it felt fragile, questionable, uncertain. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. That I had misunderstood. That context would save me. I scrolled further, hoping desperately that I would find a line that made it all make sense. Instead, I found one that broke me. Asterisk, if things were different, asterisk, I stopped reading. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. The television noise blurred into nothing. I locked the phone and placed it gently on the table, as if it were something dangerous that might explode if handled carelessly. Across the room, my wife looked up at me. Our eyes met for just a second. She smiled, the same smile I had trusted for years. I couldn't smile back. Inside me, something fundamental had shifted, not shattered, not yet, but cracked deeply enough that I knew it would never return to what it was. I picked up my jacket, told her I needed some air, and stepped outside into the cool night. The stars were out, calm and indifferent, shining as if nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. As I stood there alone, the phone's glow still burned behind my eyes, and one thought echoed louder than all the rest. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay beside my wife, staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow rhythm of her breathing. It sounded the same as it always had, steady, familiar, comforting. And yet it no longer brought me peace. Every breath felt like a reminder of the messages I had read, of the words that did not belong to me anymore. I turned slightly, careful not to wake her. In the dim light, her face looked calm, almost innocent. I searched for signs: guilt, fear, hesitation, but found none. That frightened me more than anger ever could. By morning, I had convinced myself of one thing. I needed certainty, not assumptions, not half-truths. Certainty over breakfast. We spoke about ordinary things: the weather, groceries, a small leak in the kitchen sink. I nodded, responded, even smiled when required. But inside, my mind was replaying every message, every phrase, every implication. Later that day, when she stepped out to run errands, I found myself alone with her phone again. I hesitated. This time there was no accident, no excuse. I knew crossing this line meant I could never return to ignorance. Still, the pain of not knowing was worse than the fear of the truth. I opened the messages. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. The conversation stretched back weeks, then months. The tone shifted gradually, almost harmless at first. Compliments disguised as concern. Emotional support wrapped in sympathy. Long discussions about feeling misunderstood, lonely, unappreciated. They spoke about my daughter without cruelty, but with distance, as if she were an obstacle rather than a bond. That realization cut deeper than anything else, and then there were the moments they shared, private meetings disguised as coincidences, lingering conversations after family gatherings, emotional reliance that should never have existed. This was not a sudden mistake. It was a choice, repeated, comfortable. I felt a hollow ache spread through my chest. Anger tried to rise, but it drowned in something heavier: grief. Grief for the marriage I thought I had. Grief for the family I believed was unbreakable. Worst of all was the betrayal's familiarity. This wasn't an outsider, not a stranger who crept in unnoticed. This was my wife, the woman who knew my fears, my failures, my strengths. This was my son-in-law, the man I welcomed into my home, defended when others doubted him, trusted with my daughter's heart. I replayed memories now poisoned by doubt. Family dinners where laughter felt genuine, holidays where we sat side by side, exchanging glances I had never questioned. The times I left the room, believing love and loyalty guarded what mattered most. Had they been smiling at each other then, too? The guilt came next, guilt for reading what wasn't meant for me, guilt for feeling angry instead of sad, guilt for wondering, in a moment of weakness, whether I had failed somehow, whether I had driven my wife into emotional distance. But the messages answered that question clearly. They never spoke of me with honesty, only with silence. I thought of my daughter again. Her trust was pure, unquestioning. She believed in both of them. She believed in us. The thought that she might discover this betrayal from someone else, from whispers, from accident, from humiliation, made my stomach turn. I closed the phone and sat there for a long time, hands folded, breathing slowly. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront them both and demand explanations I knew wouldn't heal anything. But beneath the pain, something else was forming. Resolve. I understood then that betrayal doesn't always announce itself with chaos. Sometimes it wears familiar faces, hides behind routine, and relies on your love to keep you blind. I would not be blind anymore. As the front door opened and my wife returned home, I stood up, my expression calm, my voice steady. She smiled at me again, unaware that the ground beneath us had already shifted. I realized something important in that moment. The truth was no longer a question. It was a responsibility, and I would carry it, carefully, patiently, until the right moment came. After betrayal reveals itself, there are two kinds of people: those who explode, and those who endure. I chose to endure. Outwardly, nothing changed. I went to work. I shared meals. I laughed at the right moments. I listened when my wife spoke, nodded when my son-in-law asked for advice, and played my role so well that even I almost believed it. But inside, I was awake in a way I had never been before. I stopped reacting and started observing. I noticed how my wife now carried her phone everywhere, even to rooms she never bothered locking before. I noticed how her laughter grew quieter when I entered a room, how conversations paused for just a fraction of a second too long. I noticed how my son-in-law suddenly became more respectful, too respectful, as if kindness could erase guilt. They thought subtlety made them invisible. It didn't. Nights became the hardest. I lay beside my wife, counting the distance between us, not in inches, but in truths unspoken. Sleep came in fragments. In those quiet hours, anger tried to convince me to act recklessly, to confront them and tear the lies open immediately. But anger is loud, and loud things rarely win. Instead, I ask myself one question over and over. Asterisk, asterisk, what outcome protects my daughter? Asterisk, asterisk, not my pride, not my pain, my daughter. I began documenting, not obsessively, not with hatred, but with care. Dates, times, patterns, messages that appeared and vanished, sudden errands, lingering conversations after family gatherings. Nothing dramatic, just truth, gathered patiently. This wasn't revenge fueled by cruelty. It was preparation fueled by love. I spoke less and listened more. When my wife talked about feeling misunderstood, I listened. When my son-in-law spoke about pressure and responsibility, I let him talk. They revealed more than they realized when they believed I was unaware. What surprised me most was how ordinary betrayal looks from the inside. No villains, no dramatic confessions, just two people convincing themselves that feelings excuse choices. There were moments I nearly broke. Once I watched my daughter lean her head on her husband's shoulder, smiling the way only trust allows. Another time she hugged her mother, thanking her for always being there. Those moments hurt more than any message ever could. But they also strengthened my resolve. I refused to let the truth come out in chaos. I refused to let my daughter be blindsided or manipulated. If this family was going to break, it would break cleanly, honestly, without lies controlling the narrative. Slowly, a plan took shape, not a trap, not a public humiliation, something quieter, something undeniable. I would create a moment where the truth could no longer hide behind secrecy, where questions would be asked naturally, where answers would have no room to escape. And when that moment came, I would not raise my voice. I would let the truth speak for itself. The hardest part was restraint, smiling when my heart felt heavy, trusting patience when instinct demanded action. But every day I waited, I grew stronger. Every day they grew more careless. They believed silence meant ignorance. They were wrong. By the time my plan was ready, I no longer felt like a victim. I felt like a guardian. And guardians don't rush. They wait, they watch, and when the time is right, they act, not with anger, but with certainty. The moment arrived quietly, just as I knew it would. It was a family gathering, nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. Dinner was planned weeks in advance. My daughter and her husband arrived together, smiling, laughing, playing the roles everyone expected. My wife moved through the house with practiced ease, setting the table, asking questions, pretending nothing weighed on her heart. I watched them all with a calm I didn't recognize in myself before. When we sat down, I didn't rush. I let the meal unfold naturally. Stories were shared, plates were passed, laughter filled the room. Anyone watching from the outside would have seen a perfect family. But truth doesn't need volume, it needs timing. After dinner, as we moved into the living room, I spoke, not loudly, not angrily. "I'd like to talk for a moment," I said, my voice steady. The room grew still. I didn't accuse, I didn't shout. I simply asked a question, one that couldn't be answered with silence. "I've noticed how much you two have been relying on each other lately," I said, looking first at my wife, then at my son-in-law. "More than feels appropriate," and my daughter's smile faded slightly, confusion replacing comfort. My wife stiffened. My son-in-law avoided my eyes. I continued carefully. "Before anyone speaks, I want honesty. Not explanations, not excuses, just the truth." The silence that followed was heavy. My daughter looked between us, her face pale. "What are you talking about?" I turned to her then, my heart breaking and healing at the same time. "I wanted to protect you," I said gently. "That's why I waited." There was nowhere left to hide. When the truth surfaced, it did so without drama. No shouting, no denial that lasted long. Guilt has a way of revealing itself when escape disappears. Tears came, apologies followed, words tumbled out, incomplete and fragile. My daughter cried quietly, not loudly, not hysterically, the kind of cry that comes from shock more than pain. That sound will stay with me forever. Consequences followed naturally. Trust was broken. Boundaries were drawn. Relationships changed, some permanently. My son-in-law faced the reality of what he had damaged. My wife faced the weight of choices she could no longer minimize. I didn't demand punishment. I demanded accountability. Redemption, I learned, doesn't always mean forgiveness. Sometimes it means facing the truth without hiding behind excuses. My daughter chose space. She chose clarity. She chose herself, and I stood beside her, not as a man seeking revenge, but as a father fulfilling his duty. As for me and my wife, our future became uncertain. Love does not vanish overnight, but it does transform when trust is lost. Whether reconciliation would come was no longer something I could control. What I could control was my dignity. In the days that followed, I felt lighter, still wounded, but no longer carrying the weight alone. The truth had been spoken. Silence no longer ruled my life. I realized then that revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like truth revealed at the right time. Sometimes it looks like choosing patience over rage. Sometimes it looks like walking away with your integrity intact. They mistook my silence for weakness. They were wrong. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the truth, and in doing so I reclaimed myself.